Ozonics, Killerwinds podcast back again. I'm Cole Tanner.
I'm Nick Simon.
Episode
39.
39, baby.
I had to think about that for a second, even though
39! Woohoo!
We are. Oh, that's not the wrong one.
Episode 39, baby!
Did you mean to do that one too?
Episode 39! Woohoo!
Okay, back. So today we are talking about something that kind of spurred from the conversation from last week.
Talked a little about DNR last week.
Yep, absolutely. We talked about the DNR, and we talked about a spot that we hunted this fall that was a piece of public ground that they've been out there doing some work on.
Yeah.
And some work that there's probably a lot of opinions about why they're doing what they're doing.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yep, and we probably are on one end of the spectrum of the opinion.
Yeah.
And what's happening out there is definitely on the other end of the spectrum.
Yep.
But the idea, I think, and again, we haven't talked to a guy from the DNR to know this, but just from the research that I've done and what you see and hear from a lot of different people is that the state of Iowa is trying to turn a lot of this public land and this habitat back to what it was pre-human interference.
Yep.
Before we plowed it all up and cut it all down.
Yeah.
And we saw that firsthand with this line of this line of cottonwood trees that got cut down, like there was just one left. Well, it really got me thinking about just the state of Iowa and, where we have come and where we are now. Mm-hmm. And it just really, really took me down quite a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a lot about a bunch of different stuff today. Just pertaining to environmental history across the state of Iowa.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you just a little bit of a rundown. We're going to talk about buffalo through the state of Iowa. We're going to talk about a couple different guys that were, a guy that was an explorer across the state of Iowa, which is kind of cool. We're going to talk about John Lacey, which is what, interestingly enough, and ironically enough, considering what some of the stuff that's come out here recently with some people that have shot deer that ended up sounding like
The Lacey Act.
the Lacey Act,
Yeah.
which was from John Lacey,
Yeah.
who is an Iowan of all things, which is
Whoa.
kind of, yeah. Oh, dude, this is like a web of crazy facts. This is like right up my alley.
I already know what this podcast is going to be called.
What?
It's going to be Cole's Iowa History Lecture.
Cole's Fun Facts. Yeah. Then we're going to talk about John Lacey. Then we're going to sprinkle in a little Theodore Roosevelt. John Lacey and Theodore Roosevelt.
My guy Teddy.
Dude, they were homies. Dude, listen, we're going to get into that. You're going to be like, holy guacamole. So that gets pretty interesting. Then we're going to circle back to Bison again.
Okay.
Then we're going to circle back to Bison in the state of Iowa and how there's actually a couple preserves in the state of Iowa that I didn't even know about, which one of them sounds really awesome. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go there.
I think I know where it is.
There's actually two, but they're awesome, and we're going to get into that.
Okay.
Then we're going to talk about other animals in the state of Iowa. That's going to be a little sad because we're going to talk about other animals in the state of Iowa that are no longer here,
Okay.
like black bears,
Elk.
like elk, like lynx,
Ooh.
also mountain lions. We're going to tap on that a little bit.
Wow.
Yep. And then we're going to come real full circle, and we're going to talk about wolves at the end. So this is going to be all over the map. So strap in.
Sorry, everybody. I did no studying.
But I think that's why this is going to be fun because we kind of talked about that beforehand. I wanted to talk to you about this beforehand, but I wanted to get your just first reaction. So none of this has been discussed until right now.
Actually, I shut it down.
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, that's true.
I did look up some stuff about Wisconsin though, just one little tidbit thing. So
Okay.
if I might be able to interject at some point,
All right.
maybe.
So let's jump in.
Okay.
So let's first, and again, I apologize if you're watching this. I'm going to be kind of going off my pieces of paper here so I can make sure I get my facts right.
Yeah.
So let's start with bison across the state of Iowa.
Bison.
And even before we get to that, the interesting thing is as I did all this research and kind of looking into this, man, there was a lot of changing that happened across the state of Iowa in the mid to late 1800s. That was really when Iowa started to become, really settled, right? And and in the early 1800s, it was first really even explored. And there's journals that have been found from these early explorers, and they weren't even really explorers at this time. Like this Stephen Carney was like a military guy,
Yeah.
right? That came across and was, said, hey, go explore the Des Moines River. And so, yeah. So, but it's interesting. They have all this stuff that documented. We're like, hey, we saw all these bison and here's where we were. And it's just really kind of ironic where we are now to where some of this stuff was explored.
Yeah.
It's just really, really cool. So we're going to get into it. So I think we all know that there was buffalo in Iowa, bison in Iowa. I think we all have a different perspective when we think about that. I know for me, when I was a kid, you hear about talked about that in school. You remember the old game that we all played, Oregon Trail.
Oh yeah.
Like killing buffalo.
Heck of a game.
Yep, there you go. And then, fact of the matter is Dances with Wolves. You remember seeing them riding on horses and shooting buffalo and Dances with Wolves.
Yeah.
I actually, when I went to Iowa State, I took a class for my degree called Environmental History. Man, oh man, that was my favorite class. There's still things that I can just snap a finger recall from that class, books that we read.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Ironically, one of the books that we read for that class was American Buffalo by Steve Rinella, which I had already read at that
there you
point.
go.
And it was funny because here I am, this kind of a redneck guy, wearing a camo hat and Carhartt jeans, walking around Iowa State's campus in the journalism department, which wasn't many guys that looked like me there. And I'm in this environmental history class, and then I get the syllabus and it says, American Buffalo. It was just kind of funny.
Yeah.
That's a great book that goes through the history. And actually Steve Rinella, documents and tells the story of his own buffalo hunt.
Right.
So, but interestingly, in 1886, there was a census that was done across the United States. They figured, it was actually in 1867, they figured there was 15 million buffalo across the United States. Buffalo ranged all across North America up into Canada. You follow me?
Yeah.
By 1885, there was only 500 to 800 left.
Dang.
So in
Holy.
19 years, it went from 15 million to less than 1,000. Think about that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. There was actually a pretty famous guy named William Hornaday, or Hornaday, excuse me. He was the chief taxidermist for the United States National Museum, and he was tasked towards the 1885 when they realized, holy cow, there's no buffalo left.
Yeah.
He went out. They thought they were going to kill them to extinction. And at that point, it looked like they were going to. He was tasked to go out and try to harvest specimens to be able to put into taxidermy, to be able to preserve them for these museums. Do you follow me?
Oh, yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So and it's funny, he actually went to Iowa State, and he also went to there was a college, I think there is still a college in Oskaloosa. It was called Oskaloosa College at the time, and the Iowa State Agricultural College, which is kind of interesting. And he really tried to work with ranchers, hunters, army officers to try to figure out where these buffalo were so he could try to track some down to try to be able to harvest a few, to be able to, preserve the identity of what they were.
Yeah.
Do you follow me?
Yep.
But yeah, it's crazy because there was buffalo all across the state of Iowa.
Right.
And then it just went down and down and down. And again, as I tried to do the research on looking at where buffalo were at in the state of Iowa, interestingly, there is documented, journals, historical journals that show that there were sightings of buffalo all across the state of Iowa.
Yeah.
But they said when the research I did, a lot of where buffalo wanted to be was in northwest and north central Iowa.
Sweet.
So right where we are.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Looks very western.
Well, tall grass prairie. That is the habitat for buffalo, is tall grass prairie.
Exactly us.
And that's what they needed. And that's what
Crazy.
northern Iowa and northwest Iowa is all bur oak, white oak groves and tall grass prairie back in the day.
Well, yeah, and think of what north central Iowa would look like if there wasn't farms everywhere in agriculture.
Yeah.
All of it would just be,
Absolutely.
that.
So interestingly, there was this thing called the Iowa Dragoons. It looks like dragons, but it's dragoons. It's got two O's, dragoons. And this was a branch of military that was tasked to go out and to explore
Okay.
different areas and basically establish like these are the maps.
Yeah.
And work with the indigenous Native Americans and the settlers that were coming across as well. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
So there was a guy named Stephen Kearney. So Stephen Kearney was a pretty cool dude. I've actually got a pretty neat picture. That's Stephen Kearney right there. That's him.
Look at that guy.
Yep. Interestingly, he was tasked to go out in 1835. So when Iowa was first being explored, it was first really entered from the southeast corner, like Davenport area,
Okay.
southeast Iowa.
Yep.
And in 1835, he was tasked to go up the Des Moines River. They just called it the Des Moines. He was tasked to go up the Des Moines River and just explore and see what he would find. Well, they actually have a map of where he went. So he actually started way down in the southeast, and he basically went up through there, kind of like what would have been Oskaloosa through Des Moines, and then actually once he got to like Des Moines, Ames, he actually angled back to the northeast, just south of Clear Lake, all the way up into Minnesota, towards like Rochester.
Yep.
Then came back across what would have been basically the Iowa-Minnesota border, across Minnesota, and then over towards, Algona, Emmitsburg area,
Yeah.
and then angled back down to Des Moines, and then took their same track back.
That's pretty cool.
So,
Probably walked right by the office.
oh, dude, it gets even better. So when they went out, they had 3 companies for the journey, 3 companies of men that went out, and they had 5 4-horse wagons accompanied with a herd of cattle that went with them as they went. And like you said, they documented that they said there was bison-studded prairies, oak savannas, and rough, hard country that we couldn't even imagine in the state of Iowa today. So if you think about if you've ever been just straight north of Des Moines and hit the Des Moines River Valley and just gone from like Saylorville Lake and north, that is bluff, rough country.
Yeah, it is.
Up, down, up, down, up, down.
Yep.
And again, off of that, it goes super flat. So they most likely, when they came across, they got on the east side of the Des Moines River and
Yeah.
just followed that. But do you think about all the rivers that drain into that,
Yeah,
drop
yeah,
into
yeah.
that, trying to traverse all that?
Yep.
That'd be insane.
Yep.
So interestingly, in his journals, they said that they ran into a herd of 5,000 bison near Northwood.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right. Which is literally 20 miles north of Mason City, Clear Lake. They said that they ran into a herd of nearly 5,000 bison and that they were trying to stay on their trail and they felt like they were too far away. And then they found another herd of a straggler herd of like 100 that they shot a couple yearlings, they said, to get the
Have
meat.
some food. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
But
were
they
literally
saw,
just talking about Northwood today.
yeah, they shot, and they said they saw 5,000 bison in Northwood.
Wow.
So is that not cool or what?
But yeah, it just makes sense though.
Well, yeah,
the
it's-
more you think about it, it's
yeah,
really crazy.
Absolutely. It's tall grass prairie back then. And then just, sporadic,
Little-
oak groves and
Yeah,
stuff.
little creeks and
Yeah.
But
But yeah, isn't that wild? So it's just kind of crazy to think about this, they called them the Iowa Dragoons. And so that was like a
Interesting.
military party that went out, on the federal government's behalf
Yeah.
to explore the Des Moines River. It said it was in June 7th of 1835 is when they took off. 1835. Actually, Clear Lake, I looked it up, was actually first discovered in 1832. Yeah. So you've heard of Daniel Boone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, his son, his name was Nathaniel Boone. He discovered Clear Lake.
What the heck?
So he was sent out by the government to, hey, go out and survey Iowa. Tell us where the rivers are. Tell us what it is. And he discovered Clear Lake. Dang. 1832. And then this guy went on his trip in 1835.
It's pretty cool.
But then interestingly, do you think about that? It was within 30 to 40, 50 years, bison were gone. God. The 1860s, 70s, and 80s, the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s was a sad time
Yeah.
for wildlife.
Yeah.
And think about it. And that time, a lot of these government agencies and bills and legislation didn't even exist.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
didn't even know. Like the old saying, you don't know what you know till you know it. That's a perfect example of what happened, unfortunately, and across our country.
Yeah.
I think the devil's advocate to that is that a lot of these people that came, they were just trying to survive.
Yeah,
They were trying not to
exactly.
die.
Yeah.
So they were looking at it going, I don't care if that's the last bison. It's either him or me.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
going to
yeah.
eat,
Yep.
you know? And so, and then on top of that, the interesting thing is in the 1844 and 1860, there was these terrible, terrible winters. They had these just unrelenting winters. And they said there was huge winter kill and, you know, the overhunting became even worse because of these terrible winters.
Yeah.
Do you follow me?
Yep.
So basically, it was already settlers coming across and really, really decimating it just from the hunting. And then, as I said, the harsh winters of 1844 and 1860 really was like kind of the final blow. It was really the knockout punch.
Yeah.
The last recorded buffalo sighting in Iowa was in 1870. There was a pair of bison that was spotted near just west of Spirit Lake.
Okay.
And that was the last reported, reported official sighting. And then they disappeared from Iowa forever. They said they came from the Northwest and they were just walking down and people saw them and then that was it.
Crazy.
Yeah. And there was, it's just really too bad.
Yeah.
But so we talked, and what I kind of alluded to there was talking about how there wasn't really legislation in place at that time.
No, yeah.
So, you know, in a lot of ways, you can't blame people
Right.
because there was nothing ever being done.
Yeah.
But interestingly, there was a guy that came along named John Lacey. John Lacey, of all things, he didn't grow up in Iowa, but he moved to Iowa later on in life. He was a Republican congressman. A lot of people called him the father of conservation legislation, which is kind of cool. He was the 6th congressional district congressman. He was a congressman from 1889 to 1907. So for quite a while.
Yeah.
But what he really became famous for is what we now know as the Lacey Act.
Yeah.
And what that really spurred from was really from his work in the late 1800s, actually 1894 into like 1900. The Lacey Act, as we know it now, originally was called the Yellowstone Park Protection Act. And what it allowed, the idea was allowed the Department of Interior to protect Yellowstone's lands and wildlife within the park from human destruction. So when John Lacey kind of came along in late 1800s, he had already watched buffalo
Yeah.
go to the wayside in Iowa, and he was good friends with Theodore Roosevelt. Well, they'd already pushed across Iowa. Now they're pushing over to Yellowstone. Now they're coming to this unbelievably pristine place.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, we need to do something now, because if we're not careful, this is going to go to the wayside too.
Yeah.
And it was actually, interestingly, in 1894, they had been working to protect, this Yellowstone National Park. And there had been this really, really bad bison poaching incident that really created this public outcry. It's like, hey, we have to do something. Mm-hmm. And that's really where John Lacey stepped in and he introduced this bill to the U.S. House of Representatives. And it gave the Department of Interior the authority to protect Yellowstone and try to fight off these poachers and try to protect bison. That was a huge turning point. If that would have never happened, dude, there'd be no bison left.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be a single one.
Yeah.
There's actually, you can find photos of confiscated bison heads still after the poaching, where they passed this legislation for that to stop. It still happened. But again, the interesting thing about this as well is that John Lacey and Theodore Roosevelt, their paths really crossed and intertwined, right? So we have John Lacey trying to pass this legislation to really protect Yellowstone, okay?
Yep.
But then you also have, at the same time, Theodore Roosevelt really kind of coming into his own, into the public eye. Something that I found that was just kind of funny, that was kind of interesting. Theodore Roosevelt, there's a bunch of really, really interesting books out there about, he really looked at himself as a conservationist, okay? And, he learned Latin, and he would look at animals and he would hunt animals, and then he would dissect them, and was really interested in the taxonomy and of different classifications of animals and all this stuff. Is really interesting. If you ever have a chance to look into Theodore Roosevelt, he was a real gangster. You know what I mean? Back in the day, like a real OG,
Yeah.
But interestingly, he was kind of the type of guy he was very outspoken, and it seemed from the outside looking in as if he wanted a lot of public attention. His daughter, her name was Alice, she always said that everything he did was like a pure act, like it was always just a show. But she said that her dad always wanted to be the bride of every wedding and the corpse of every funeral. I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is funny.
He always wanted attention. And the interesting thing is John Lacey was the opposite of that.
Yeah.
He wanted nothing to do with it. He just wanted to try to really enact change and help. You follow me?
Right.
So, Theodore Roosevelt and George Bird Grinnell started what is now and what was the Boone and Crockett Club. Well, John Lacey was a part of that as well. So that's really where John Lacey and Theodore Roosevelt's paths really started to cross when that whole thing really came about.
Yeah.
And then in 1900, there was much consideration, debate, delay. The Lacey Act was really passed. And the Lacey Act is really what we know today. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think there's kind of confusion about what the Lacey Act actually is. So I want to a little bit clarify what the Lacey Act is. So again, it was passed in 1900. It prevents hunters who illegally killed game in one state to transfer it across state lines to escape prosecution. Do you follow me?
Gotcha. Yeah.
It's not only just about animals, it's also plants. Do you follow me? It's even the swath or the, what it protects is greater than just animals. Do you follow me?
Yep.
It was initially meant to address illegal commercial hunting, which was at that time was really decimating, like we talked about, Yellowstone and buffalo. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What the Lacey Act now means is you hear about that a lot of times when you hear people that get themselves pinched or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
When they post something illegally, where they really end up usually getting dinged is on the Lacey Act.
Yeah.
And you always hear people say, oh yeah, well, what happened? Well, I had a Lacey Act violation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and that's the nice thing about the Lacey Act too, is like back in the day, I think now where it's just become so much more prevalent is I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, if I do something illegal in Colorado, all I got to do is just get across the state line and I can't be prosecuted because I'm from Iowa.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Yeah.
Nice try. That's where they get you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they really ding people is on that Lacey Act.
Yeah.
This might not hold up. That might hold up. But guess what? You shot it in here and you brought it over here. Well, guess what? Now we got you.
Yeah.
And so that's what's really interesting about that. But so again, talking about where John Lacey and Theodore Roosevelt's paths really crossed, which is interesting as well, is Theodore Roosevelt became president in 1906. Okay. And a lot of people know Theodore Roosevelt was huge in the establishment of so many national parks and public land all across the United States. Mm-hmm. Okay. But he also ran into a lot of resistance from special interest groups, really putting pressure on Congress, trying to put pressure on Theodore Roosevelt to not make all these national parks.
Yeah.
Do you follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, John Lacey was kind of in the background. He could see this. So John Lacey and Edgar Lee Hewitt stepped in and really authored what would become known as the Antiquities Act. Okay. And what that allowed Theodore Roosevelt to do, he had the power to conserve lands without congressional approval. Okay. So he could kind of basically this Antiquities Act that John Lacey helped author basically allowed Theodore Roosevelt to have the power to do kind of whatever he wanted when it came to national forests. Well, interestingly, at that time, one of the places that was under staunch debate was the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon back then was known as the Big Ditch. And it was being eyed by mining and other natural resource extraction interests because of all this was all the whatever
Yeah.
that was there.
Yeah.
They were looking at this going, hey, man, there's got to be deposits of what we're looking for.
Right.
And so, this Antiquities Act by John Lacey, and what it allowed Theodore Roosevelt to do is, that was one of the national parks that he set was the Grand Canyon. So it's just kind of crazy
Yeah.
how much that he did. And like you said, John Lacey served 8 terms. Interestingly, when he finally lost, Theodore Roosevelt went to him and said, hey, man, I want you to be on my cabinet. And he's like, no. He didn't really want that limelight. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm good. He moved back to Iowa and he practiced law until he died in 1913 is when he passed away.
Okay.
But it's interesting because, again, Theodore Roosevelt really wanted the limelight, but John Lacey really didn't. And if it really, the Lacey Act, I can kind of put him on the map, but he really would have probably kind of fallen, into the dustpan of history
Right.
that nobody would have ever known who he was.
Yeah.
He had huge influence in some of these things that now saved buffalo across the United States.
Right.
But back then, he just like, I'm just gonna do my thing. It's kind of cool dude.
Yeah.
Probably a guy that I wish I could have met. And it's kind of one of those things where it's nice when there's people that really, really make a difference.
Yeah, exactly.
And that guy really did.
Yeah.
Just pretty crazy. So bringing that full circle, like we talked about a bit ago, in the 1860s, 70s, bison across Iowa were wiped out. There just wasn't any left. Literally, there was none. I mean, in 1835, they saw 5,000 by Northwood, and now 20, 30 years later, they're gone,
Yeah.
which is a really sad deal. There are 2 preserves in the state of Iowa.
Yep.
Okay. There's one actually just southeast of Des Moines, and there's one north of Sioux City.
Yeah.
Okay. So the one southeast of Des Moines is the Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge. And the one north of Sioux City is the Broken Kettle Grassland Preserve. So I actually did some research and I actually called because the Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge that's southeast of Des Moines, it didn't have they had a good website, but it had a ton of information.
Yeah.
I just called and just asked the gal today. They have 60 head of bison there. And they've got those 60 head on 800 acres of their 6,000.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So it's all high fence,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
The interesting thing that I was going to mention as well is today across the United States, there's about 500,000 bison that remain in North America. Less than 30,000 are pure wild bison, and only 5,000 are unfenced. So we've got way less than we used to.
Yeah.
So that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But again, when you look state of Iowa, there's basically 2 places. So you can go, if you're ever wanting to go see some bison, these refuges are really trying to reestablish this tall grass prairie
Right.
that we've decimated.
Yeah.
And really trying to bring it back to that. And obviously, bison had a huge part of that ecosystem.
Yeah.
So they've reestablished these bison in here.
Yeah.
The one that really trips my trigger that I want to check out is the Broken Kettle Grassland Preserve. Dude, they started with 28 bison in 2008.
Yeah.
They have over 200 now.
Dang.
They have 200 bison on 1,900 acres of their 3,000. That's a big 1,900 acres. That's a big chunk.
Yeah.
What's even cooler is they do a Broken Kettle Grasslands Bison Roundup. If you jump on their website, we'll put it up here. You can actually see some videos where they're herding the bison in and they're vaccinating them and make sure they're healthy and doing what they got to do and documenting how many they have. And then they show them releasing them, and man, it looks pretty sweet.
That is cool.
Obviously, it's all high fenced.
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I mean? And again, I think about my kids, right? Like we go over to Lake Okoboji every year. So from Lake Okoboji to Sioux City, that's probably like an hour.
Yeah.
Next summer, I'm probably going to take the kids over there. I might even try to work out when that roundup is and go over there and see that.
Yeah.
Just because, it just sucks that they're not here anymore.
Yeah.
And it a little bit feels sad to see them in a high fence like that, but at least they're there.
Yeah.
At least we're trying.
Yeah, exactly.
The interesting thing is in all this research that I did is that a lot of what I read is that the landscape of Iowa isn't conducive anymore to even hold or be able to maintain a herd of bison.
Right.
Right. So, and I wish I knew where I found it, and I won't be able to find it now, but the state of Iowa was, a huge section of it was this tall grass prairie, like the majority of it, right?
Yeah.
It was either tall grass prairie or it was oak groves, like white oak and bur oak groves. Now that tall grass prairie, all of it together in the state of Iowa is 0.1%.
Jeez.
Think about that. 0.1% of the state is left with that tall grass
That
prairie.
is crazy.
So bison couldn't even live there if they tried.
Yeah.
Now, I would really be interested to talk to like a bison biologist because you would think that a bison could live on corn and beans, but farmers aren't going to like that.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
They get in the middle of a cornfield, you think they could just decimate it.
Yeah.
But maybe they can't. Maybe that's not good enough, right?
Right.
But anyway, so I would really like to check out one of those two preserves and be able to see
Yeah, it would be really cool.
where those bison are at.
Yeah.
And again, it's awesome that they're there. I mean, to think that they went from 28 to 200
Yeah, that's
since
sweet.
2008
Yeah.
is pretty killer.
Yeah.
And 1,900 acres for them to be able to run around, that's a big chunk.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah. So, I don't know, kind of interesting. And it's kind of cool to think about the fact that John Lacey was from the state of
Yeah,
Iowa.
that's really cool.
And that the Lacey Act, originated from that as well.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. And
Yeah.
to think about how him and Theodore Roosevelt are entwined,
Yeah.
and how John Lacey had a huge impact with an Antiquities Act that allowed Theodore Roosevelt to be able to sign those bills into legislation. I mean, think about that. If none of that would have happened right now,
Yeah.
where would we be?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's really, really, it's kind of mind blowing to think about,
Yeah.
So from there, the next thing I wanted to talk about was some of the other animals. This is kind of where we get a little sad. Bison thing's kind of sad too. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's cool that we're trying to do what we can to maintain.
Yeah.
Probably never going to have bison. It's kind of cool to know that in North Iowa, this is where they were.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, next
sweet.
time I'm going to go out hunting at some of those public spots, I'm just going to sit there and close my eyes or look out at the landscape and think about 5,000 bison walking across there.
Yeah, I mean that's.
Pretty cool.
I mean, it's funny. Like I imagine that even now before knowing that, it just looks like.
Where they would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just looks like that landscape, and
Yeah.
it's really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. So like I said, we talked about the fact that, by the 1860s, there was very few bison left in Iowa. The last reported documented sighting was in 1870, and then they were gone. The other animal that we've talked about on the podcast before that was across the state of Iowa was elk. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the mid to late 1800s was a really sad time for wildlife. Again, settlers coming across looked at elk and was like, "Oh, well, look at how big they are.
Yeah.
They're big. They got a whole pile of meat on them. Let's eat them."
Yeah.
So they were hunted. Like you said, there was vast numbers of elk across the state. The last reported historical sighting of a native elk in Iowa was 1871. So they've been gone. They've been gone for a while too.
Yeah.
So that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, settlers and hunters noticed the big game, which provided, the meat prize for both quantity and quality, right? So they saw it and they go, "Hey, we need to eat,"
Yeah.
and so they killed them.
Did it say anything about where they were located?
It just said that Bill Elk once called the expanses of Iowa prairies home in good numbers.
So
I would think
probably
roughly
pretty similar.
Yeah, very similar
Yeah.
to the bison.
Yeah.
And I've all the research that I've done before talked about that elk are more of a plains animal.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. I mean, look at where we were in Montana.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yep. So then from there, the other thing that we don't have a lot of anymore, but is still out there, is black bears.
Yeah.
Again, the interesting thing about the next two we're going to talk about with black bears and lynx, settlers saw these animals as predators. They saw and said, "Hey, they're gonna kill our livestock." Well, come on, you know what I mean? Like, interestingly, could a bear kill livestock? Yeah, it could, but they were probably out there going after what bears go after.
Yeah.
But yeah, they said obviously bears preferred woodland areas. So there was a lot more black bears reported in eastern
East
Iowa.
side, yeah.
Eastern Iowa along the Mississippi River. Again, there hasn't been a reported real bear, bears that are living here since the mid 1800s.
Really?
Yeah, been gone. But again, now there's bears all across Minnesota,
Wisconsin.
bears across Minnesota, There's actually bears. There's a herd of bears. That's not what you would call it, but there's bears in southern Missouri that have been recorded. And they say that there still are few bears, that they get sightings of in Iowa. I mean, there was actually a bear however many years ago, right actually here in north central Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But again, it got shot.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was actually just south of here, between here and Sheffield.
Huh.
Yeah. They saw a bear on this little creek. A farmer saw it, and it was like a cub. It wasn't even like a big bear. It was like a small bear.
Interesting.
And they saw it, and it was 100% a bear. But the interesting thing, and this is what I think is kind of crazy about it too, just like mountain lions, they're not. The state of Iowa has animals that are hunted and regulated, and they have seasons. But black bears, there's no season. Mountain lions, there's no season.
Yeah.
So if you see a black bear or if you see a mountain lion, you can just shoot it.
Yeah. Right.
Because they're not a game animal.
Yeah.
They're looked at as like an exotic.
Yeah.
And so they can just be shot.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of sucks. Like that black bear that was spotted however many years ago around here. Was that really doing any harm to anybody? No, he said from what I understand, there was cattle near there.
Yeah.
So, but it was sounded like it was like they saw it like in a creek or something.
Huh.
So, but I kind of wish those animals were just like protected, I guess. Like you just couldn't shoot them.
Yeah.
You couldn't just shoot them. Again, I feel like they just get shot to get shot.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is what we did
Yeah.
in the 1800s.
Yeah. At least like,
Probably even more now for more of no reason.
yeah. At least protected enough to where like if they do start coming back or whatever, protected enough to where you could have a season for them. You know what I mean?
Right. But again, a lot of what I read about black bears too is that we don't have really the good habitat. Again, in eastern Iowa, they could make it work, but around here, it's just not conducive. And then the other animal that we don't have anymore, that this one would be super cool to see around, is lynx.
Yeah.
So lynx were indigenous to northern Iowa. That's what I found. There was really 3 cat predators in Iowa. There was lynx, there was bobcat, and there was mountain lion.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's reported sightings of mountain lions here and there,
Yeah.
but few and far between.
Yeah.
There still are bobcats. There's actually bobcat hunting
Yeah.
in the southern half of Iowa. There's not an established season or enough of them, they say, in the northern half of Iowa.
Yeah.
Now, we had a bobcat on camera this last fall, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And we actually reported to the DNR, and they wanted to see us. That was cool.
Yeah.
Whatever that means for them.
Yeah.
But interestingly, we killed lynx to extinction in Iowa.
Yeah.
Like I said, they say the last reported lynx was in the 1880s.
Jeez.
So yeah, dude, 1860s,
1880,
70s,
yeah.
80s was a rough time. Again, they say settlers killed them because they said they were trying to kill their livestock.
Yeah.
But interestingly, like lynx, their main animal that they're trying to prey on is rabbits.
Yeah, exactly.
Like small game,
Small game,
not
yeah.
livestock,
Yeah.
So, but it is small animals like rabbits, blah, 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 blah. But what do you do? Again, they say the closest population of lynx now is in northern Minnesota and Canada.
Okay.
We just don't have them here.
Yeah.
But again, they're easily confused with a bobcat, like very similar to a bobcat. But how awesome would that be?
Yeah.
See a lynx walking around?
Yeah.
Psh, that'd be awesome. Give me a break. That'd be so sweet.
Give me a break.
I'm telling you, dude. All right. This is getting us to our last subject. My disclaimer before I go in, I'm not trying to stir up a bunch of whatever, because it seems like this conversation.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. It's interesting because it doesn't feel like this is as heated of a discussion in Iowa because they seem like it's so few and far between. You get over to Wisconsin, it gets pretty heated.
Oh, yeah.
You look at what's happening in Colorado right now, it gets pretty heated.
Yeah.
And I understand why, right? I understand why. I feel like I kind of see it from both perspectives. I think it's great that the federal government and the state agencies are trying to reestablish some of these animals that we've killed off.
Mm-hmm.
It really sucks that they're just gone. We upped them out.
Yeah.
But also you hear about how they're putting wolves in these areas that weren't indigenous to those areas.
Yeah.
Bigger wolves, and things like that. And, I have friends that live in Wisconsin. You're from Wisconsin. I know that you could probably tell stories for days of what's happened in Wisconsin. I have friends that get trail cam pics of them and are seeing less deer, so they do have an effect. You hear what's happening in Ontario and a lot and all throughout Canada with wolves and the moose populations and or the lack of moose that are left.
Yeah.
It's just, and again, actually going back to that environmental history class I took, I read a book called Vicious. If you ever want to read a really cool book about wolves, it was all about how we really killed wolves all across the United States, lower 48, to where there was none left. The thing that I always come back to with the wolf discussion and what that book really gave me the perspective of is it's not really the wolf's fault. Wolves are going to do what they do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like wolves, their whole thing is they're trying to hunt and they're trying to mate and procreate.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and then do that again and do that again and do that again and survive. And so they're going to do whatever they have to do that. What I think really needs to be more on the forefront of this discussion is the biologists and the legislatures that are in the legislative states that are making these decisions and that are bringing these wolves back. That's where I think it gets really tricky.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We were actually in Montana this year, and that guy Ryan that we were hunting with, or Scott and Buddy were hunting with, we were filming. Ryan is from Montana, and he goes down and hunts really close to Yellowstone every year during the winter and hunts wolves a lot. Really gets after it and shoots wolves down there. And man, that gets heated.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that he's run into and people and death threats and all sorts of crazy stuff. It's just really, crazy. But so again, when we look at wolves across the United States, again, we talk about the mid 1800s.
Yeah.
That was when, the mid 1800s to the early 1900s is when the gray wolf was really subject to intensive eradication, intensive hunting across all of the United States.
Right.
You follow me? Wolves were really killed off through much of the lower 48 into the mid 1960s, leaving only a small population in northern Minnesota. And then by 1974, the gray wolf was protected in the lower 48 with the Endangered Species Act. And that's really what has been the thing that when it comes to hunting organizations or anti-hunting or wildlife interest groups, that's the huge give and take, and the piece that keeps being debated is the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah.
Wisconsin is a perfect example. They were protected in lower 48, like Wisconsin, underneath what they call the ESA, Endangered Species Act.
Yeah.
Then, how many years ago, they were taken off the Endangered Species Act in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And they were hunted hard.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yep. Then, in December 2014, a federal court overturned the delisting of the population and is now back on the Endangered Species Act by federal law.
Yeah.
So there you go with that. So, it's awesome when the courts are making laws. That's always good.
Yeah.
That's always great I'm going to stand on my soapbox when I say that. I'm not good with sarcasm, but that's about sarcastic as I get. Right? Like, let's have the courts making laws. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Jeez. Sorry, I just spit on the thing. But so, yeah, it's crazy. So again, the wolf debate, there's been, look what's happened in Colorado. They've released wolves in southern Colorado. I have friends that hunt Colorado, and they're trying to hunt. They've been putting in for years, and they're trying to draw their elk tags. They're like, there ain't gonna be any left.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's ain't gonna be left.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, when you look at the state of Iowa, okay, there's really two subspecies of gray wolves that occur in Iowa. There's the Great Plains wolf, which really follow the bison herds across the plains. Again, those are gone. And then there's the Eastern timber wolf, which inhabited more of the wooded areas. So probably had the Great Plains wolf, probably was in North Iowa. Yeah. And then you had that Eastern timber wolf, which probably in the southern half and the eastern half.
Yeah.
Okay. So the crazy thing is that they say that we don't have the habitat or a breeding population of wolves in Iowa. This is a document that I found that is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. and it specifically talks about Iowa.
Yeah.
It actually has people's names in different places that have documented sightings, tracks, seeing
Right.
wolves themselves. So I think we can pretty much count on this. But again, their big thing in this document, and all of it is very good information, but underlined is no breeding population at this time is unlikely to, lack sustainable habitat in the state of Iowa.
Yeah.
So probably not going to have wolves here.
Yeah.
That ain't going to happen. But wolves move through. So there are wolves in Wisconsin. Okay. The Western Great Lake wolf population spreads throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan.
Yeah.
Okay. There have been wolves that have been killed, have been tested, and they figured out came from the Western Great Lakes wolf population. In 2010, 2 wolves were taken in Sioux and Guthrie counties. In 2014, 2 female wolves were shot in Buchanan and Jones County. Those 2 that were shot in Buchanan and Jones were weighed, and they weighed close to 70 pounds. Neither had whelped, which I think means really had reached adulthood, and they were estimated to be about 2 years old. But the DNA evidence from one of the wolves indicated it was from the Western Great Lakes wolf population.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the other crazy thing is they talk about in this study, they talk about how basically there's the established like wolf area, but then they move out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They kind of move out. They move out. They move out. So what's also really crazy is there's been wolves seen in Missouri from 2000 to 2014, one of which was a radio-collared animal that dispersed 600 miles south from Michigan into Missouri.
Jeez.
600 miles.
That's crazy.
If it went from Michigan to Missouri, there's probably a good chance it came through Iowa.
Through Iowa at some point.
And then there was 2 to 4 wolves that were sighted in Illinois back in 2014. So again, there's also been wolves spotted in Houston County, which is in Minnesota, but that's right across from Alameda County in Iowa.
Yep.
There's actually a
Southeastern side of
Yep.
Minnesota.
there's a guy named Rodney Rovang, which is a manager at this national monument, whatever. Has observed occasional wolf tracks in the past decade in Alameda County. So, and there's been reported sightings there as well.
Yeah.
A lot of times people, and it talks about this, a lot of guys get confused because they see a big dog or a German Shepherd
Right.
or a
Exactly.
coyote
Yep.
and they think it's a wolf.
Yep.
I mean, we've heard it even here. Oh man, I've seen mountain lions on my place. Really? Wow. Okay. Got a whole ton of trail cameras out. Like never, not that it can't, not that they can't get around a trail camera,
Exactly.
but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're around,
Yeah.
and again, Minnesota is not that far away. And if they can disperse 600 miles,
Yeah.
think about that.
Yeah. Exactly.
They also talk about that when you look at like southeast Minnesota and the Mississippi River Valley,
Yeah.
it's very conducive
To travel along
Yep,
that.
kind of a corridor
Yeah.
that wolves could move up and down
Yeah.
pretty easily,
Yep.
and be unseen and get from one place to where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that surprises me that when they talk about not a sustainable population is the fact that there's deer all over the place. You think they could just bale hay,
Yeah. Exactly.
But
Yeah.
I guess that's not enough.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Yeah, I don't get that part.
Yeah. It's funny too. Like where I live, I don't think we've ever seen a wolf or heard of anything. But then like you go like, probably an hour north, and you hear about it all the time.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I've
It's
heard-
just
I have
super
friends-
interesting
friends near Green Bay.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
They've definitely heard.
Yep.
They've definitely seen them and heard them there.
Which that's pretty close to the UP, so that
Yep.
makes a lot of sense. It's
Right.
weird. It's like it comes down, like where you hear about it. It's like it's obviously like all of northern Wisconsin, and it kind of like comes down like central Wisconsin almost. It's very interesting of like where people see them and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've never seen one. I've heard them at my buddy's cabin where my dad hunts. They have a major wolf issue.
Yeah. Well, that's like even when I, years ago, I was a videographer and I got to go on a couple wolf hunts. We
Yeah.
did a wolf hunt in British Columbia and then we did a wolf hunt in Northwest Ontario, basically just on the Canada side, straight, would have been west of like Thunder Bay.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very close to the Minnesota-Canada border.
Yeah.
And we wolf hunted there. And the guy that we were wolf hunting with, he's like, oh yeah, man, they've decimated the moose through here.
Yeah.
I mean, they've just knocked them out. And we heard wolves, and we had an opportunity, and we harvested a wolf.
Yeah.
It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. They are a crazy animal too.
They are big.
Yeah.
They are super big.
Yep. I'm at calls with a guy who had issues with it on their farm.
Oh, really?
And he's like, it's like when you see one in person, he's like, it's one of the craziest things.
Well, dude, that's like even when the wolf that I had a chance to video and that the guy harvested, it was pretty insane because when we got back, we were on snowmobiles, right? And we were way, way back in this bush country, you know what I mean? And if you've been to northern Minnesota, southern Canada, like that, it's very just crazy. Just feels very remote.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know? And it's just lots of just vast forest,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And we had the opportunity to harvest that wolf, and then we snowmobile back to the house, and he had a Siberian Husky, a full-grown male Siberian Husky. And it was there the whole time. And I remember being like petting I love dogs. Yeah. So I was like petting the dog. I'm like, it felt like a big dog. We got back and we put that wolf on the ground, and to see the wolf and to see that Siberian Husky, it dwarfed it.
Yeah.
And that Siberian Husky, it knew.
Yeah.
It 100%. You could tell it was not liking it.
Yeah.
It was like tail between its legs, like I am out of here.
Yeah.
It didn't want anything to do with it. But it was insane how big they are.
Yeah.
You know, and we were in Montana seeing some of the pictures that Ryan showed us in the video, some of the wolves that he's harvested. It's
unbelievable.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Like I said, like you said, I don't have no pun intended, but I don't have a dog in the fight. You know, in the fact that I'm not a landowner and I have cattle. Yeah. I understand from their perspective and what that does. I'm not an outfitter in Colorado. I don't, to think about some of these guys that are outfitting near these areas where they've released these wolves and think, man, oh man,
Yeah.
The thing that in that Vicious book it talks about, and the thing that I think, which I think is a hard question for biologists to answer on this whole thing is when we had wolves in these ecosystems, there was a balance, right? There was a balance between the wolves and the elk or the wolves and the deer. You follow me? And so it balanced. Well, we got rid of that predator. And was that a mistake? Yes, it was. But we did it. And here we are now. And now all of a sudden we don't have the prey and the predator. We only have the prey.
Yeah.
So you take out the predator and all of a sudden that scale, it starts to tip one way.
Right.
And all of a sudden the elk numbers and the mule deer numbers grow and grow and grow. And 100 years goes by, 50 years goes by, whatever it is. And all of a sudden this generation of people, they've established businesses. They have everything that their livelihood revolves around this new established herd and population of elk and deer and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden now you drop back in predator to this huge population of prey. What do you think's going to happen? Yeah. It's like fish in a barrel.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And what's going to be the real pain point is when this scale tries to balance back out.
Yeah.
That's what's going to be really, that's what's going to be the painful part.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing in Montana.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing in Idaho. Talk to Randy.
Yeah.
Randy Stoppenhagen. He'll tell you stories.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those areas where there's just no elk left.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not as many as there used to be.
Yeah.
Now is that is that what they have now? Is that where it should be? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that balancing part is where it's going to be really painful.
Right. Exactly.
And I think Colorado's about ready to go through that.
Yeah, definitely.
Wisconsin's going through that right now.
Yep.
And I think the Wisconsin, like what they're going through, that's just going to get more and more and more.
Yeah, I think so too.
You follow me?
Yeah, definitely.
If you don't have wolves near where you live now, I wouldn't be surprised if you do.
Oh, definitely.
10, 15 years from now.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Because they're just going to spread out.
Even with black bear, I mean, growing up you never heard of anything where I am with black bears, and now, heck, we had one in our backyard last spring.
Yeah,
like it seems like everything is kind of starting to really move south in Wisconsin.
The interesting thing about black bears too is, like, for example, you look at Pennsylvania.
Yeah, they're loaded with them.
There's black bears everywhere.
Yeah.
Whoa. Just got a little physical with that pen.
Yeah.
What are you doing, microphone? Don't be getting in my way. No. There's black bears everywhere in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
But now, I think they've even taken away the black bear hunting in Pennsylvania.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think some of their, I don't know if it's throughout the whole state or just parts of the state.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's less black bear hunting of availability there too. But you look at Pennsylvania and it's very fragmented. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of forest, but there's a lot of agriculture as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You would think that the southern half of Iowa could sustain black bears.
Oh, you would think.
You would think.
Yeah. It's
But-
way different than what it is up here.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just the landscape of everything.
Yeah. But so yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like I said, I think the moral of the story for this podcast is just the fact of to kind of try to shed some light on where we've been.
Yeah.
And if you ever have a chance, like you said, it's a pretty cool Google just to look up bison in Iowa.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting articles out there, some blogs out there, some things that you can watch out there that talk about bison in Iowa, talk about John Lacey, that talk about Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah.
The exploration of the state of Iowa is pretty intriguing, and where they came across, and to just think about
Yeah, definitely.
seeing 5,000 bison standing there,
Yeah.
that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Everything really that we talked about today. I mean, we're about to go do some night fishing on Clear Lake, and it's like, oh man, it's kind of cool. Like,
yeah,
just to think about like the years of history just on that body of water. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's super interesting.
yeah. I actually found there's some historical sites about Clear Lake
Mm-hmm.
and about how they've like drilled the Clear Lake bedrock
Yeah.
to like look for and like to age out geologically how old the lake is and stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Like 1.4 million years old. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's unreal.
yeah, it's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like you said, moral of the story, if you're out there hunting, take a chance, close your eyes.
Think about it.
Yeah, imagine some of that stuff. And I think the other thing too and again, I'm not involved in this way. And I know
Yeah.
a lot of guys that are, and I have a lot of respect for people that do stand up and get involved on the conservation side of things.
Yeah.
Because that is so important.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be the John Lacey of our generation. Do you
Right,
follow me?
exactly.
The person that's going to do something that's going to really make a difference,
Yeah.
right? That's going to sustain this, awesome hunting opportunity and place that we get to, just the way it is. Like,
Yeah.
I want that to go into I want my kids to be able to experience that too.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
want there to be deer, and I want them to have the opportunity to go hunt an elk and all that stuff. You know what I mean? And so the decisions we make, they do have consequences.
Yeah.
And, I think some of the things with wolves and reintroducing them, you don't know what you know till you know it.
Yeah, exactly.
And we might not know where we're at on that for 20, 30, 40 years. We might look
Yep.
back and go, oh, that was a huge mistake.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
they might look at it and say, you know what, that was a great thing that we did.
Mm-hmm.
But again, so much that it's just really based on your perspective and your opinion.
Yeah. Without a doubt.
But again, history doesn't lie. And when you look back at this, you go, man, what can we learn from it?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I say we wrap it up. Like I said, we need to get doing some fishing. We need to do some fishing on some hard water.
Especially with the weather coming up. We're
Oh yeah, a little
running
rain,
out of days.
little rain snow mix. Got consumer shows right around the corner. We ain't gonna have much time.
50 degrees next Thursday.
Are you serious?
Yep.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, on that note, let's end it. Hey, if you're out on the road, stay safe. Watch out, it might be slippery. If you get a chance to get on the ice, make sure it's thick enough. Be poking along. What do you call that thing you use?
Spud bar.
Spud bar. Get your spud bar out. That's it. Wrapping it up. Thanks again. Ozonics Killerwinds podcast. I'm Cole Tanner.
I'm Nick Simon.
Hey, thanks for being surprised with all the fun facts.
You're welcome.